What is going on, guys? Hope everyone is doing great out there. Thanks so much for joining us. I'm honored that you're here. And we've got a lot to cover in this episode, including some fearful news about China and some darker and much larger clouds on the horizon, perhaps. We've got some good news about Ukraine. We've got some bad news. I'll definitely get into that. And we're going to talk about a couple of other things. But I thought maybe before we get into all that, can we start with a little humor? Can we start with just, man, everyone's all uptight about the election and just lots of things, these protests on campuses, and I thought, let's start with something a little bit lighter this week. I have to share with you guys something that I saw on X, or what was Twitter, that had me start initially just kind of chuckling, and then by the end I was rolling. So hopefully this is as funny to you as it was to me. Now, like all great arguments and fights that happen on Twitter or X, it started with something kind of, just a small comment, and then rapidly devolves into a massive food fight that is hilarious. So here was the pretty innocuous tweet that started the entire thing. A guy from Australia who is a barrister, or what we would call an attorney, puts out this pretty bland tweet. He said, "My parents once told me that on a holiday in Europe," which of course is how they term the word vacation, so on a vacation in Europe, the tour guide asked the group where they were from. The non-Americans mentioned their country. The people from the USA mentioned their state, taking the USA as a given. I've never forgotten that. So that was the entirety of the tweet. And then someone's in the replies, and there were a bunch, someone said, "And that is why I am proud to be an American, the greatest country in the world." And this guy says, "LOL," of course laughing out loud, "give me one single metric by which the USA is the, quote, greatest country in the world." And from there's nothing but hilarity that just, I want to read some of these because they're too good. This is, when Twitter is good, or X these days, it's great. And sometimes these food fights are they're amazing. So let me just read some of these to you because I think you're going to laugh. First one. "We're the only country that has sent people to the moon. And we did that 50 years ago." It's pretty good. Another one. "We actually don't use the metric system." Here's the next one. "Texas has a stronger GDP than your entire country, dude." And then there was a more serious one about how we have the largest GDP in the world. Someone else said we have the highest military spending, and that's one metric by which we are the greatest country in the world. Another just took the facts and just started blasting the guy with them. He says, "We're number one in the world for Nobel laureates, going back 79 years and counting. We have the most Olympic medals, almost double the Soviet Union, and that's for 120 years and counting. We've led on that. GDP, 134 years and counting. Military power, 126 years and counting." And that person added, "It's good to be king, brother." And then someone says, "Average migration to Australia per year, 550,000. Average migration to the United States per year, 2.6 million legally, millions more illegally." Now, maybe there's not millions more illegally, but that's pretty funny. He adds, "People don't flee their own countries on boats made of garbage through shark-infested waters because it sucks here." And then we've got another person that writes, "Nearly every innovation that the first world nations enjoy today came from the US. Indoor AC, refrigeration, electricity, mass production, alloy steel, computers, airplanes, and on and on and on. Hate America all you want, but the world is what it is today because of us." There were two more serious ones. One person mentions that we have the world's largest economy, holding the currency that's used as a metric by every other nation. Someone else mentioned that almost every medical innovation or breakthrough happens in the United States. And then besides the military, the economy, the scientific breakthroughs, someone even takes it to the point of talking about the arts. And the person says, how about inventing every form of popular music for the past 100 or 50 years or so? Jazz, blues, pop, rock, rap, hip-hop, EDM. The person says, other countries sprang a few subgenres, but the origin is all American. This commenter, someone named Billy, said, I say that as a Yank who happily lives outside the USA, but music, we did that. Well, the guy from Australia actually pushes back and says, you understand that the Beatles, Led Zeppelin, Pink Floyd, the Rolling Stones, Queen, Black Sabbath, and the Kings were all British, right? And then someone says, yeah, and they were all playing American music. And I will end with one final one. Someone simply put in basically like an image from Top Gun. And they said, how about 11 aircraft carriers? Anyway, I'm having too much fun with it. But I am obviously very proud of our country. And I know we can sometimes be a little bit of a loud country. We're a little loud when we're tourists. And I know we drive other people crazy sometimes. But we got to be proud of our country. And we also, probably need to pull it back a little bit sometimes when we're visiting other countries. But anyway, I hope you got a laugh out of that before we get too serious on the news tonight. Because there is certainly some news to be serious about. And I thought I would begin by discussing China. A lot has happened in China with China in the past 2 or 3 weeks. And things are starting to deteriorate. And honestly, it's happening quite quickly. There was another incident that happened in the South China Sea involving the Philippines and some ships from the Chinese Coast Guard, and I'm going to cover that in a second. But to set up the topic, I want to begin with a clip that came from Richard Haass, who is a long-time State Department guy who also was the president of the Council of Foreign Relations, and so has a lot of experience. And he gave some interesting comments before the Secretary of State visited China last week and before this recent incident with the ships again, which it's like a repeat. This happened a few weeks ago, but it's happened again. But he talks about the troubling, like we're headed toward troubled waters. And I want you to, he just says it so well that I think if you just listen to this clip, you'll get a lot from it. So here again is Richard Haass and what he was saying before the visit ended with the Secretary of State, Antony Blinken, who visited China.
Richard, Secretary of State Antony Blinken just wrapped up a meeting with Chinese leader Xi Jinping to discussing the war in Ukraine and China's support for Russia in that war, as well as Beijing's economic and trade practices. This is Blinken's second visit to China in less than a year. Secretary Blinken said he had hoped to make progress on some of these issues. Ahead of his meeting with Xi, Blinken met with the Chinese foreign minister and described those talks as extensive and constructive. So, Richard, what's the objective here as China, now we know, continues to help Russia in the war against Ukraine? Obviously, a polar opposite position from where the United States is. What does the Secretary hope to get done in Beijing over these couple of days?
Well, to some extent, Willie, just the high-level meetings becoming more normal and more regular is one of the goals. And I think both sides are committed to that ever since November when Presidents Biden and Xi met in San Francisco. Yes, as you just pointed out, there's a desire to put a limit on any Chinese aid to Russia. It's not working real well. China's not sending military arms, as best we know, but they're sending just about everything else short of that. In many ways, trying to strengthen the Russian arms industry so Russia can increase its production of militarily relevant technologies and equipment and so forth. the emphasis is still to avoid a war, not just over Taiwan, but probably more imminently in the South China Sea. The fact that, if you remember a couple of days ago when the Japanese prime minister here, one day there was a trilateral. Why? Because you wanted the leader of the Philippines to be part of it. That's probably the most immediate flashpoint. So sometimes for the United States and China, it's not what the two can accomplish, but it's what the two can agree to avoid. And that, in some ways, is at the heart, I think, of this relationship. Willie, just think about the backdrop. You just had Janet Yellen there, tremendous pressure on the Chinese not to export all these electronic vehicles and stuff. Then you have the legislation was basically sell or ban TikTok. This is a troubled relationship, and both sides want to calm it down. But there's no real basis. There's no real intellectual or political consensus for how to move it forward.
And of course, the Congress just passed and President Biden signed that foreign aid bill that gives aid to our partners in the Indo-Pacific to kind of bolster against China.
That last part referred to $8 billion that was in the recent defense aid bill that will be used to counter China. Of course, that was part of a larger package that included funding to Ukraine, funding to Israel, and I covered that in a previous podcast, and it's been all in the news, but that's what they're referring to there at the end. As I said a moment ago, China has had 2 Coast Guard ships attack another Filipino ship. You can see video on that. I've got a link in the episode notes. There's a story in CNN about that. There's also a story in the Financial Times that I've got a link to regarding the meeting with Antony Blinken, the Secretary of State, and Xi Jinping. If you look at the 2 stories, you'll see that President Biden has called the president of China, Xi Jinping, and talked about the South China Sea. President Biden has reinforced that we do consider the islands that the Philippines claim, as does China, as ground that we will defend. So it's definitely a pretty tense situation, and I'm not sure how it resolves itself. I've been saying that for a couple of months. It's just now it's starting to make the news a little more and a little more. So we'll see how this plays out, and I will definitely keep you guys posted as things happen there. But there's some great details in those articles about these islands and these reefs that both countries are claiming and why it's important. There's great fishing there. There's some other potential benefits, such as potentially even oil, but it's also about putting basically military bases and airfields and airstrips on some of these, essentially these, they're unpopulated islands, but if you claim one of these, then you get to control a large area around it with your military, as well as commercial fishing, exploration of oil and other minerals. So it's kind of hard as an American to wrap your arms around, but it's just, this is the story that I've been covering since, more than a year now, that China has increasingly been more aggressive in encroaching on the Philippines and other countries such as Vietnam and some of the smaller countries around there. And as we've been saying with this theme that I've been talking about for the past year, all of these countries alone cannot individually prevent China from basically bullying them economically and militarily, and so they're all beginning to band together with the United States and other countries in Europe, such as the UK and France and Australia, to essentially get a larger alliance so that we can hopefully contain China and keep it from doing what it seems is certainly starting to seem more and more as if what they want to do. Let me share one other point on this and try to give a fair view of the Chinese perspective. They see the recent aid to Taiwan and the recently signed bill that would force TikTok, which is owned by China, to sell the app or be banned in the US as things that are just very offensive to them. And so there's a quote that comes from their Chinese foreign ministry spokesperson who said that they have lodged serious representations to the U.S. The package gravely infringes upon China's sovereignty It includes large military aid to Taiwan, which seriously violates the One China principle and sends a seriously wrong signal to Taiwan independence separatist forces. And then the spokesperson went on to say that the TikTok legislation undermines the principles of market economy and fair competition by going after other countries' companies in the name of, quote, national security, which the spokesman says once again reveals the US's hegemonic and bullying nature. So China sees us as the aggressor. And just, as some background, the reason U.S. lawmakers passed the bill about TikTok is that they see TikTok as a risk to U.S. national security since it collects tons of user data and has increasingly been used to spread propaganda. And if there were to be some type of conflict or something, since so many people are starting to get their news from TikTok, that's seen as a potential national security threat. So these are definitely pretty bumpy waters that we're going to have to go through with China right now. Let's move from China to Ukraine. I want to share some good news and some bad news regarding Ukraine this week. Now, in the good news category, the U.S., as a part of that larger bill a couple of weeks ago, did announce another aid package. They sent $1 billion a week ago, and the most recent one is $6 billion. I won't go too much into the details just because it's been out there for several days now, and most of the stuff is just what you would imagine we were sending: more ammunition for artillery, more long-range rockets for those HIMARS, the multiple launch rocket system, more ATACMS, things like that. I've got a link to it if you want to read up on what all is in it. That is announced at least, and so I'm not going to spend much time on that. The other bit of good news is that the U.S. recently just announced that it purchased 81 Soviet-era jets from Kazakhstan. They purchased these for only $2.26 million, or about $20,000 each. And while these are older, Ukraine does know how to fly them. Some of them will only be used for parts to refurbish fighters that are currently grounded inside Ukraine. But these are expected to be inside Ukraine and available to be used in fairly short order. So I've got a link to that if you want to take a look at that article in the episode notes. So that will be some great news for Ukraine. Now, there is a flip side to the good news, and that is the bad news that I need to share. If you go to the episode notes, you can see two different links to maps. And if you click the links and actually go onto X or Twitter, you will see moving GIFs of how much ground the Russians have gained over the past month. And they have a couple of small breakthroughs happening as we speak. But the short of it is, Russia has gained about 75 square kilometers in the Donetsk region the past month or so. And there's, like I said, there's a couple of breakthroughs happening as we speak where they're making a few rapid advances. So the reality is that the delay in getting much of the ammunition and the artillery shells from the U.S., the delay that we had a delay that went all the way back to November, and that has unfortunately cost Ukraine about 75 square kilometers so far. And I'm hoping that as we get that aid there, the Ukrainians can restabilize their lines into at least a stalemate in the short term. But the sad reality is that the delay has cost Ukraine ground, not to mention lives. So they have paid for this in blood and treasure, and it's really sad, especially when you consider how many the 8 U.S. senators, Republicans, who switched their votes and actually voted for it, as I mentioned in the last podcast. It was just nothing but a bunch of, showboating and delay, and it was just really a sad situation for Ukraine that happened. But you can see the ground that the Russians have gained. If you want to see that in the episode notes, I've got links to both of those two maps, and it's worth taking a look at if you've got a couple of moments. We're going to take a quick break, but when we come back, we've got two stories I want to cover regarding Africa. One of them involves the withdrawal of U.S. troops from a part of Africa, and the other involves 4 dead American troops from a few years ago, and something that has happened since then that I think you'll be interested in hearing. We'll cover that in just a moment after this break. I hope you're enjoying the show so far. If you haven't figured out the format of the show or what I'm about, let me just briefly explain it. Every week I do 3 things. First, I cover defense news and hot spots happening around the world that could affect our country. Secondly, I work to unite the nation and make you feel better and more optimistic about the country's future. And then finally, at the end of each episode, I share some motivation and inspiration because we all can use a little of that. I also, during that section of the show, recognize a Medal of Honor recipient. If you enjoy the show, you can help support it. As you know, we have no sponsors or commercials, but for $5 per month, you can help me grow this into something bigger. I will be completely honest and transparent here. I work a full-time job that I actually do enjoy, but I feel almost compelled to do this. I feel like we need to unify this country. I feel like there are people that need some optimism, some motivation, some inspiration. And honestly, I feel like there are some people who need God. I don't want to push that too much, but I also don't want to shy away from that. The honest truth is, when I'm not working or spending time with my family, I feel drawn to do this. I would love in a perfect world to devote myself to this full time, but there's absolutely no pressure. I'm going to continue doing this whether there are a ton of supporters or not, just in my free time. So if you would like to grow this into something better, if you would like to support, if you think what I'm doing is important, you would like to see this effort flourish, then definitely sign up. I know that I could make these better with more time and with better quality and more preparation. Perhaps I can reach more people. So there you have it. We are in a public square. I am performing as best I can with the instrument that I have and with the amount of time that I've been able to devote to this. And there is a bucket sitting in front of me. If you want to throw a few dollars in, that would be awesome. If you don't, I will be here next week performing again. All the details for how to do this are in the episode notes on my Substack page, or you can also do so through Patreon. Let's talk about Africa now. So, there is a story from Task and Purpose, which is a defense news related outlet, that is saying that forces that are allied with the United States have potentially killed the leader of ISIS in Africa that claimed to be one of the leaders that was involved in the death of 4 U.S. troops. So I've got a link to that story, but this leader of ISIS down there named Abu Huzaifa, if I said that right, Abu Huzaifa, actually in most of the photos that he's been in, he's usually carrying a rifle that he said belonged to the dead Green Berets. This was part of a 2017 ambush that happened inside Niger. That was pretty big news back then, although now it's been almost, 8 years, so it seems like it's not something that's in the consciousness of a lot of people right now. But if you want to read that link, there was a very large reward on the head of this leader of ISIS, and the U.S. is trying to determine if indeed he has been taken out. And there are photos of someone that potentially looks like him, so it's still a little too early to know for sure, but there is a chance that he has been taken out by an ally of the United States. In other news in Africa, U.S. or CNN is reporting that the United States has withdrawn special operation forces from a base in Chad after their government demanded that the U.S. depart CNN had previously reported that fewer than 100 troops were at the base inside Chad. They were at a French base there, but most of them were part of the actually part of the U.S. Special Operations Task Force. But those have been withdrawn and moved to Germany. So wanted to get that news out. There's not a lot of reason as to why that withdrawal was required or was even requested. In fact, the CNN article said that there were upcoming elections and that the dispute with the U.S. between Chad and our special operations is largely a paperwork issue that they think will be resolved after an election in a month. So this may not be that big a news, but there have been some issues inside Africa where lately Russia seems to be doing a better job on the PR front than the United States. And, you know, there has been some news that inside Niger itself, that where over 1,000 U.S. troops are, there's a lot of discussions about how to negotiate a safe and orderly withdrawal of the 1,000 troops inside Niger because they want us to leave as well. Alright, let's get to the best part of the show. I call this the Never Ever Give Up segment. And I call it the Never Ever Give Up segment because we must never ever give up as a country. Though we face great division, a massive debt burden, and probably future problems that none of us could even predict. But we must never give up as a country. And I believe we must stay united. And also, as individuals, we must never, ever give up. We've got family and friends counting on us. So in this section, I'm going to share some motivation to help encourage you. I'd like to begin by honoring a Medal of Honor recipient. If you don't know, the Medal of Honor is the highest military decoration you can possibly earn in the military, and it's awarded to service members who have distinguished themselves by acts of valor. The medal is typically awarded by the President of the United States upon the recommendation of the armed services. One final footnote before I read this week's. As I said when I first began this back in April, I am just going in alphabetical order because I could not possibly decide which wars to begin with, which services, etc. And since there's more than 3,000 of these, it was just too much. So I'm just going very simplistic, alphabetical order. This week, we're going to honor someone who served in the Vietnam War, and this is a pretty incredible story. The name of the soldier was Sergeant First Class Benny Adkins. Adkins served in the Special Forces, and in Vietnam, he actually did 3 tours of duty, one of which is after the story I'm about to tell you. But in 1966, Sergeant First Class Adkins was serving at a camp or a combat outpost called Camp A Shaw in the Republic of Vietnam when the camp was attacked by a large Viet Cong force and eventually overrun. Here is Adkins's citation. On March 9th, 1966, Sergeant First Class Adkins was serving during combat operations at Camp A Shaw in the Republic of Vietnam. When the camp was attacked by a large Viet Cong force, Sergeant First Class Adkins rushed through intense hostile fire and manned a mortar position. Although he was wounded, he ran through exploding mortar rounds and dragged several of his comrades to safety. When the hostile fire subsided, Sergeant First Class Adkins exposed himself to sporadic sniper fire and carried his wounded comrades to the camp first aid station. During the evacuation of a seriously wounded American, Sergeant First Class Adkins maneuvered outside the camp walls to draw fire and successfully covered the rescue. During the following morning, on March 10th, a Viet Cong regiment launched their main attack. Within 2 hours, Sergeant First Class Adkins was the only man firing a mortar weapon. Although he was painfully wounded and most of his crew was killed or wounded, he fought off the fanatical waves of attacking Viet Cong. After withdrawing to a communications bunker where several Americans were attempting to fight off a company of Viet Cong, Sergeant First Class Atkins killed numerous insurgents with his suppressive fire. Running extremely low on ammunition, he returned to the mortar pit, gathered the vital ammunition, and ran through intense fire back to the communications bunker. After being ordered to evacuate the camp, all signal equipment and classified documents were destroyed. Sergeant First Class Atkins and a small group of men fought their way out of the camp and evaded the Viet Cong for 2 days until they were rescued by a helicopter. Sergeant First Class Atkins' extraordinary heroism in close combat against a numerically superior hostile force was in keeping with the highest traditions of the military service and reflect great credit upon himself, his unit, and the United States Army. What an incredible story, right? And then this guy ended up going back and doing another tour several years later. Just unbelievable heroism. Now, if you wonder why I share these stories, I share these Medal of Honor stories because I want to remind us of the sacrifices that have been made through the nearly 250 years of American history. Through so many major wars, more than 1 million Americans have sacrificed their lives and died, getting us to this place and time. In wars such as the American Revolution, the War of 1812, the Civil War, World War I, World War II, the Korean War, the Vietnam War, Desert Shield and Desert Storm. Then after September 11th, there was Operation Enduring Freedom in Afghanistan, Operation Iraqi Freedom. And these were just the major wars that I've listed. And I know I overlooked so many smaller conflicts. In total, we've had more than 41 million Americans serve over the course of our nation's history. And as I said earlier, more than 1 million have died, and tens of millions have been wounded or had their lives shattered. So I think it's always important we remember these facts, particularly when we have people regularly saying we face a potential civil war or that we should split up our country because of whatever the latest culture war is, or any other number of silly reasons. I think our grandparents and our great-grandparents and those who came before them would be dumbfounded to think we could rip apart this great nation over such trifling issues as we face today. Now, let's share some motivation to make sure that we never ever give up in our own personal lives. Of course, if you're a regular listener, you know I also speak about never giving up when I discuss PTSD at the end of the show. But for now, let's just talk about some motivation, and we've got some great ones this week. Here's the first one. It's a quote from John Maxwell, who you've probably heard of. Here's the quote. Successful and unsuccessful people do not vary greatly in their abilities. They vary in their desires to reach their potential. So successful and unsuccessful people do not vary greatly in their abilities. They vary in their desires to reach their potential. How bad do you want it, right? It's a good one. Here's the next one. If you want an abundant harvest tomorrow, you have to be willing to plant the seeds today. It's another great one. This next one's a quote from John Bon Jovi, obviously a great musician that hopefully all of you guys know, unless you're really young. Here's the quote. Miracles happen every day. Change your perception of what a miracle is, and you'll see them all around you. It's pretty deep. Miracles happen every day. Change your perception of what a miracle is, and you'll see them all around you. Here's the next one. An entire sea of water can't sink a ship unless it gets inside the ship. Similarly, the negativity of the world can't put you down unless you allow it to get inside you. It's another good one. I think I've heard that one before, but it's been a while. But guard your heart, right? Don't let the negativity get inside of you. Here's the next one. Your life is happening right now. Make sure you're enjoying it. Again, your life is happening right now. Make sure you're enjoying it. Here's the next one. When everything seems like an uphill struggle, just think of the view from the top. Again, when everything seems like an uphill struggle, just think of the view from the top. Next one. Life has a way of testing you to see if you are ready for the next level. Again, life has a way of testing you to see if you are ready for the next level. And as you guys know, I always like to share a few from the Bible, just because this book has become such a source of strength and wisdom and even calm for me during the past year. And I hope by sharing a few, it might encourage you to get into the Bible yourself, because I think it'll really help you. Here's the first one. It's from 1 Chronicles chapter 16, verse 11. Look to the Lord and his strength. Seek his face always. Again, look to the Lord and his strength. Seek his face always. Next one's from Psalm chapter 29, verse 11. The Lord gives strength to his people. The Lord blesses his people with peace. It's a good one. The Lord gives strength to his people. The Lord blesses his people with peace. The next one's from Isaiah chapter 58, verse 11. And the Lord will guide you continually and satisfy your desire in scorched places and make your bones strong. And you shall be like a watered garden, like a spring of water, whose waters do not fail. It's just a great verse. And the Lord will guide you continually and satisfy your desire in scorched places and make your bones strong. And you shall be like a watered garden, like a spring of water, whose waters do not fail. And the last one is Psalm chapter 22, verse 19. But you, Lord, do not be far from me. You are my strength. Come quickly to help me. Thanks so much for joining us this week. I hope as you go through this week that you act a little nicer on social media and in the world as well. Smile at folks in the grocery store, do small acts of kindness, and remember that most Americans are good, and they will help you in an emergency, even if you don't agree politically. Now, I have to finish with two things. I want to say a bit about myself and my books in case you're new to the show, and then I need to say some words for those struggling with PTSD or mental illness, especially since veterans are at a 57% higher risk of suicide. First, a bit about myself and my books. I am a military vet. I spent 4 years in the Marine Corps, all of that time in the infantry, and yes, that does matter. After my enlistment, I went to college at the University of Tennessee. I became a journalist. I spent more than 10 years in the news business. Besides all of that, I've also written 12 books. Those books include a series about a Marine Corps sniper, several novels about a police detective and a private investigator, and a few books about war, such as World War II and Afghanistan. Basically, these are all fast-moving books with lots of action and plot twists, because those are the kind of books I've always enjoyed reading. You can find all of those books in the link in the episode notes, or you can look on Amazon by just searching my name, Stan R. Mitchell. Buying a book, telling a friend about a book, or buying one as a gift for someone, friend or loved one, is a great way to help support the show. And in all seriousness, they're pretty highly rated, and I've been very fortunate to have sold 70,000 copies to date. And I promise you, even though I live in Tennessee, I do not have that many cousins. The second thing I need to talk about is PTSD and suicide for just a moment. This isn't just for our veterans, although I know PTSD does seem to affect veterans at a much higher rate, but it's for anyone. We can all get in a really low spot, but we have to remember that it's a season. It's a valley. If you're having serious issues, please call 988-SELECT-1. You can talk to a crisis line responder anytime, day or night. Whether you're a civilian or a veteran, it doesn't matter. But I do know this is hard to do, and I know most of you won't, so I have to be a little mean here. The fact is that when we had a drill instructor in boot camp pushing us, or maybe a tough coach back in high school, you know that you can go further than when it's just yourself pushing you. So I'm going to be that person. I'm going to be mean for just a moment, and I have to remind you that you cannot give up. Do not lose this fight. Do not make your parents or your family have to plan your funeral. Don't make them feel guilty that they did not check on you, that they could not reach you. You can hold on another day. And if you do, I promise the next day will be a little easier. Now, again, if you're in a fight that you worry you may lose, call someone. Call a friend or a family member. Please, just do that. Or call 988, select 1. But whatever you do, do not quit. You're in a valley and this world needs you. Probably your parents need you. I mean, seriously, who's going to take care of your parents in 30 years? I'm being dead serious here. I just helped take care of my mom while she fought with cancer before she passed. I'm helping take care of my dad now. But who's going to do it for you? Are you going to let the system take care of them? How horrible is that? So you cannot quit. And believe me, there's something you're meant to do. You just can't see it because you're in this immediate fog and pain. You can't see that end result. But there's a mission for you to do. Maybe it's to coach Little League. Maybe it's to help others with PTSD. Maybe it's to run for office. But there's some calling for you. You just haven't found it. But you need to get involved. You need to stop isolating yourself. Go visit a veterans group, the VFW. Visit a church near you. Talk to some family that you have lost touch with. Or maybe reach out to that friend that you've grown apart from. They're probably dying to talk to you. But seriously, if you're struggling, call the hotline 988 and select 1. Or you can also start moving toward God. If you're not willing to make that phone call, read the Bible if you never have. I think it will help. Read some of Psalms or Proverbs, or start with the New Testament, maybe Luke. I think you'll find that the Bible will start drawing you in and changing your life. If you don't have a Bible, you can download a Bible app on your phone, or you can look it up online. There are dozens of sites with it. Even simpler, I have a link in the episode notes that I think can help you. I write a faith-based blog about the Bible and God, and I have a link in my episode notes to a pretty powerful story about my dog, who is a stray that we adopted from the shelter. The title of the article is Be Like Ozzy, Go Near Your Master. I've had a lot of people tell me that story really helped move them, that it was very impactful. So, it's free to read. You got nothing to lose by going to read it. Now, I always like to end each show by reminding people that you can comment anytime. I try to monitor those. You can also reach out privately by email to me at authorstanrmitchell@yahoo.com. And that's in the episode notes, by the way. But again, it's authorstanrmitchell@yahoo.com. Hey, here's one other thing. This podcast is about defense news, but I also do a political blog. So if you love my moderate, optimistic views, you might enjoy that. It's called Thoughts from a Southern Gentleman. You can find a link to the episode notes to that as well, or you can just search that on Google. Hey, thanks for hanging with me this week. It's truly an honor to talk with each of you, and to know that there's a few of you out there who are listening and who care about our country and our military and all the issues that we face. I know there are a lot of scary issues out there, but we're going to get through them together, the same way America's gotten through everything before this. I love you all, but never forget that God loves you more than you can possibly imagine. He is our true Father, so I hope you spend some time with Him this week. If you want true peace and strength and wisdom, make sure you read your Bible some this week. It'll help you a lot. And also, reach out to a friend or anyone who you know is struggling. Whether they are young or old, life is truly hard. We know this. But the true strength of this country is its people, and that includes you folks listening to me right now. So be a leader, be a doer, be a servant to someone. With all of that being said, I'll catch you all next week. You have been listening to The View from the Front. I hope you enjoyed the show.